He had packed every detail of the trip with care: the hotel in Florence, the itinerary through Tuscany, the wine-tasting stops, the quiet villa they would stay in for a week, just him and his mother. He thought it would be the beginning of something new between them, a truce, a moment to finally speak, without the burden of silence stretched over years. A trip they had postponed for over a decade. But this time she had promised. She had looked him in the eye and said, "We'll go together." He believed her. And so he stood at gate B37 of the Chicago International Terminal, holding 2 cappuccinos, one for himself, one for his mother. He had just stepped away to get them, thinking it would be a sweet way to start the flight. He returned to find her seat empty, confused. He glanced around the boarding area. Then his name echoed faintly overhead, just as a woman was stepping through the gate with a man he had never seen before. She wasn't carrying her usual tote bag. She wasn't looking around for him. She was boarding, with someone else. At first, he thought it was a mistake, a last-minute upgrade, maybe a change of gate. But his phone buzzed. One message: "Don't wait. I'm already boarding. Traveling with Raymond now. Hope you understand." She didn't say sorry. She didn't say why. She didn't even say goodbye. He stood there with both cappuccinos in hand. The one meant for her grew cold first. Ryan Montgomery was not a teenager anymore. He wasn't even the young man she once told to grow out of it. He was 40, successful and independent. But the wound still stung because he hadn't come here just for a vacation. He had come to give her one more chance to see him, truly see him. They were supposed to go to Italy together, to visit Florence, where he had first met Matteo, to walk through the vineyards he had once dreamed of owning with another man, a man his mother never asked about. She had said she wanted to understand him better. He believed her, and that was his mistake, because what she really wanted was a trip, not a son. He didn't cause a scene, didn't chase after her at the gate. He sat down, placed both cups on the floor and stared out at the runway. She had moved on, and she didn't even need him there to do it. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't need her either. What she didn't know was this: Italy wasn't just a trip for him. It was home to everything he had built. And unlike her, he was arriving on his own terms. Have you ever trusted someone with your whole heart only to be left standing alone? If this story touched something inside you, don't leave just yet. Heart Stories has more than just tales, it has truth. Subscribe and stay for what comes next. Ryan didn't call in. He didn't reply to the message. He didn't ask why. He simply stood up, left the empty cups beside the window, and walked out of the terminal with the quiet grace of someone who had spent a lifetime practicing restraint. Not silence out of weakness, but out of choice. He hailed a cab home, not because he had nowhere to go, but because he needed to breathe in a space that didn't echo her absence. That night, in his apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline, Ryan opened a small wooden box he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a collection of things the world would find insignificant: a faded train ticket from Naples, a Polaroid photo of 2 young men under the same umbrella, a folded piece of paper with architectural sketches, and a neatly pressed handkerchief embroidered with one named Matteo. Matteo wasn't just a memory. He was the reason Ryan had dreamed of Tuscany in the first place. They had planned a future there once, 2 creatives chasing a slower life among olive trees and brick courtyards. But that dream was buried the day a car came speeding through a wet intersection in Rome and took Matteo away. At the funeral, Ryan had sat in the far back row. Matteo's family never acknowledged him. They didn't need to. Their silence was loud enough. When Ryan returned to the U.S., he threw himself into work. He co-founded a boutique hotel brand, expanded into Europe, and quietly, deliberately bought the villa in Tuscany he and Matteo had once walked past and pointed to, saying, one day, he turned it into a retreat, not just for couples, but for memory, for people who had to love in silence. The villa bore Matteo's influence in every stone and every vine. But no one ever knew that, because Ryan never talked about it, especially not with his mother. She never asked. She never wanted to know. When he came out at 30, she called it a phase. When he turned 35, she called it a lifestyle. And when Matteo died, she didn't call it all. But she was the one who later suggested the trip. She was the one who brought up Florence, said she wanted to understand him better, see his world. And Ryan believed her. Because the little boy inside him still hoped that maybe if he just gave her enough time, enough space, enough love, she would meet him halfway. But Gate B27 wasn't halfway. It was the end of the road. He didn't fall apart that night. He didn't cry. He did something else instead. He picked up the phone, not to call his mother, but to call his assistant. Get the jet ready. Destination Florence, and let them know and I'll need the staff at the villa ready for a private event. No guests this week, just me. The next morning, he packed one small bag. He placed the handkerchief on top. He didn't check in at the commercial terminal. He didn't wait in line. He boarded a sleek black jet with no logos and tinted windows. The pilot greeted him by name. As the wheels lifted off the tarmac, Ryan closed his eyes. He wasn't running away. He was arriving. Finally, all as himself. The flight was smooth, quiet, intentional. Ryan sat by the window, not because he needed the view, but because looking out reminded him of the distance he had built, not from his mother, but from needing her approval. The flight path took them directly over the Mediterranean. Somewhere below, there was a road he and Matteo had once driven together in a beat-up Fiat. Music too loud, arms sunburned. They had stopped for fresh apricots and talked about how one day they'd never have to rent again. One day, they'd own something that felt like theirs. That day had come, years later. But Matteo was no longer there to see it. The jet touched down in Florence before noon. A private car waited on the tarmac. No immigration lines, no small talk, just a silent driver who greeted Ryan with a bow and handed him a single envelope. Inside was the updated event schedule for the week guest arrivals. Catering, staffing. Ryan crossed out every name but his own. He wouldn't be hosting anyone. Not this week. This time, the villa would open not as a retreat, but as a statement. The drive to Tuscany took just under 90 minutes. As the car curved through hills and terraced fields, memories pressed gently against the glass. He remembered Matteo's hands brushing against the tall grass. He remembered the corner cafe where they had tasted their first limoncello. He remembered Matteo holding his sketchbook under the cypress trees and saying, "Imagine if we lived here." Ryan did more than imagine. The villa stood exactly as they had dreamed it. Stucco walls aged with care, vines curling around archways, wrought iron balconies with a view that silenced grief. Inside, nothing screamed wealth. Everything whispered love. The curtains were Matteo's favorite color, a soft, weathered green. The tiles were imported from Naples, just as he had planned. And in the corner of the main room, framed in shadow and light, was the original architectural rendering signed in Matteo's delicate hand. Ryan walked into the study, placed the embroidered handkerchief on the desk, and opened the window wide. The scent of rosemary filled the air. He didn't cry. Not yet. But he did something he hadn't done in years. He called the vineyard manager and said, "Schedule the harvest celebration. Move it up 1 week." The man hesitated. "It's usually a public event, sir." "Not this year," Ryan said. "Oh, this year. We do it private and add a gallery wall in the front courtyard. What should we display?" Ryan paused, looked at the Polaroid of him and Matteo, and for the first time in over a decade, he said it aloud. Photographs of Matteo, from Naples, from Florence, all of it. Then he walked into the master suite. He opened the closet and removed a single hand-stitched banner that Matteo had once made for their dream opening. It had never been used, but it had always been waiting. The fabric was soft, slightly faded, but the words were still legible. "To those who loved quietly welcome home." Outside the villa gates, no one knew who owned the property. Not the villagers, not the press. It had always been kept private, but in just a few hours, 2 unexpected guests would arrive. his mother and Raymond. They had booked the Tuscany tour through an upscale agency. They would walk in expecting luxury, but they would walk into legacy, a legacy that didn't belong to them, but to the man they had chosen to forget. And this time the door would not be open. The car pulled up to the villa's entrance just before sunset. The lights soaked the walls in golden warmth, as if the house itself remembered the touch of someone long gone. Helen stepped out first, adjusting her scarf. She scanned the courtyard with a rehearsed smile, the kind worn by tourists who expect indulgence, not consequence. Raymond followed, holding their shared luggage. Neither of them looked up at the banner above the entrance. If they had, they might have noticed the words, faded but intact, to those who loved quietly welcome home. A young woman at the gate greeted them in Italian, then switched smoothly to English. "Your reservation is not confirmed under the current guest list," she said politely. Helen frowned. "That's not possible. I booked this weeks ago through Premier Escapes." "Yes, Signora, but the owner has closed this week's availability to the public." "We're not the public," Helen replied, her voice tightening. "I'm the mother of—" She paused, not because she forgot what to say, but because she suddenly realized she didn't know how to define her place in this setting. Raymond stepped forward, agitated. "This is outrageous. Call the manager." The woman nodded once, then stepped aside to allow them into the front courtyard to wait. It was meant to be a holding space, but instead, it became a gallery. Along the stone walls, under soft amber lights, stretched a series of photographs, some in black and white, others warm with the haze of old Polaroid film. The first image showed two young men by a lake in Naples. One of them slightly taller, hair curled in the wind, was Ryan. The other, with warm eyes and a quiet smile, held a sketchbook in his lap. Helen's breath caught. The next photo showed them in Florence, heads pressed together, oblivious to the world. Then, another under a cypress tree, Matteo sketching while Ryan lay beside him with a half-read book. Every photo was undated, untitled. But they didn't need captions. They were a timeline, a testament. Helen stepped backward, as if the images physically pushed her. Raymond stood silently beside her now, no longer looking for a manager. His eyes had locked on one photograph in particular, Matteo standing beside a half-built stone wall, wearing a work apron, dust on his cheek. He looked younger in that photo. It was a memory, not just Ryan's, but his own. Because Raymond had known Matteo too, long ago. He had been the one who told Matteo to walk away from the relationship. He had said, "His family will never accept it. Let him go before they make you disappear." Now he stood at the center of the very legacy he had told Matteo to abandon. A quiet voice echoed from the far end of the courtyard. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough gravity to stop both Helen and Raymond mid-step. "The owner is on his way. He asked that you wait in the garden." They were led through the villa's archway into a space Matteo had once designed himself. Stone benches under flowering vines, a small water fountain engraved with the initials R+M. Helen traced the letters with her fingers. It was there that the weight of absence truly arrived, not as punishment, but as revelation. This place wasn't built for guests. It wasn't curated for profit. It was constructed brick by brick, in memory of someone no one had ever spoken of around her dinner table. And now, every stone seemed to ask the same question. "Why didn't you want to know?" Helen sat in silence as the sun slipped behind the hills. Raymond remained standing, arms folded, eyes on the ground. In the distance, they heard the sound of tires on gravel. A black vehicle approached slowly, deliberately. He was coming, not as her son, but as the man she had never taken time to meet. The door of the villa opened without ceremony. Ryan stepped through, dressed in a plain linen shirt, no assistance, no announcement. He didn't speak. He simply nodded at the staff, then turned toward the garden, where Helen and Raymond waited. She stood as he approached, unsure if she should embrace him, apologize, or pretend this wasn't as deeply personal as it was. But he didn't offer her an opening. He looked at her and then past her, as if the act of being present didn't require approval anymore. "I asked them to keep you here until I arrived," he said calmly. "This isn't a place for drop-in visits." Helen tried to find her voice. "I didn't know that it belonged to me," he replied. She hesitated. "No, Doi," she said. "That it belonged to him." Ryan nodded. The silence after that was neither cruel nor forgiving. It was space that had been missing for years between them. He turned toward the house. "Come in. There's something you should see." She followed him up the stone steps, through the arched hallway, and into a room on the second floor. The door was wooden, hand-carved, older than the villa itself. He opened it slowly. The room was small, but every object inside felt deliberately placed. On the wall, sketches. On the desk, a folded map of the Amalfi Coast. On the bed, a blanket with frayed edges, still smelling faintly of lemon and cologne. And above the window, etched into the wood, Matteo's name. Helen stepped forward, eyes scanning every detail. She stopped in front of a framed photograph on the nightstand. It was one she had never seen. Ryan and Matteo, sitting under the sun, foreheads touching, both smiling as if the world had finally allowed it. Her hand trembled. "How long have you kept all this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Since the day he died," Ryan replied, "Baye. Nothing's changed, not even the bed sheets." Helen turned to face him. "I should have asked," she said. "I should have cared more." "You didn't want to know," he said, "and I stopped trying to convince you." They stood in silence. "I can't undo that," she said. "No," he replied, "but you can stop pretending it didn't exist." She reached for the photo, then pulled her hand back, unsure if she had the right to touch it. "May I?" she asked. Ryan nodded. And in that single moment when she asked instead of assumed, the weight between them shifted. She didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't offer it. But what passed between them was something far more honest: recognition. On their way out, Helen stopped beside the door and placed her palm against the frame. "Will you take me?" she asked softly, "to visit his grave before I leave?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not as a son trying to be accepted, but as a man deciding what to allow back in. He gave a single nod, not out of obligation, but out of clarity. They walked downstairs together, not as mother and son made whole, but as two people standing in the ruins of what was broken, ready, maybe, to build again. Outside, the sun had dipped low. The villa stood still in the twilight, wrapped in memory and olive leaves. Inside, Ryan remained for a moment alone. He walked back to the room, picked up the handkerchief embroidered with Matteo, and folded it carefully. There are some wounds that time doesn't heal, but time does teach you which doors are worth keeping open and which ones must be closed for good. Have you ever kept a memory alive because the world refused to? Let us know in the comments. And if this story found its way to your heart, subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that speak what others leave unspoken.